2011, I wrote a book with my mother called Out of a Far Country, A Gay Son's Journey to God, A Broken Mother's Search for Hope. That was our first book, my first book ever, and it was simply our story. It was our journey of faith, starting from the day that I came out to my parents and that crisis which brought them to faith, and then the many years that followed of me just running from God, running from my parents, and God in His just amazing love and compassion, wooed me to Himself, and our whole family now serving God as a two-generational ministry. So that book was really simply our story. I like to tell people, think of our first book as talking to your heart. This next book, Holy Sexuality and the Gospel, Sex, Desire, and Relationships Shaped by God's Grand Story, is taking a concept that I introduced in my first book, Holy Sexuality, chapter 30, one of my last chapters, where I introduce this concept and then fleshing it out. And it's actually really doing a theology of sexuality. So where the first book was heart, the second book is head and hands. It's really important for us to understand that though we want to, our gut instinct is to jump in and to love and to show compassion, we need to actually make sure that our compassion is grounded in truth. Our love is grounded in truth. Because there's many modes of love. There's many means of showing love. But we need to realize, first of all, that God is love and that God's love is grounded in His truth. So I think it's really important, where my book started with some good biblical theology, systematic theology, and then jumping into the last few chapters of good practical chapters talking about marriage and singleness. How do I show love to my gay friends who don't know Christ? How do I help my brother or sister in Christ who experiences same-sex attractions? These very practical things. And I know right away people think, I don't want to read a book on theology. I'm not a theologian, most oftentimes people say. The reality is we've misunderstood theology. I think there's a stigma around this concept of theology. And the reality is all of us are theologians. If you have any knowledge of God, if you have thoughts about God, you're a theologian. So actually, the issue isn't whether you are a theologian or not. The issue is whether you're a good theologian or not. So my hope is to actually show you how we could do good theology. Theology not separated from praxis, but actually theology that drives us into praxis. Because bad theology is theology that lays stagnant and just stays in our mind and doesn't kind of impel us toward living it out. Good theology is theology that actually impels us to action. So that's the difference of my first book, kind of the heart, the story, and my second book now that is mind and hands, that helps us to think right, to then do right.